When we communicate, it generally involves telling some kind of story. Now, what happened and in what order did it happen? And there are lots of ways of doing this. Today, we're going to be looking at 3 main ways of communicating the order of events in German. And we're going to be using prepositions, connectors, and conjunctions. And we'll find out the difference between all those little words like vor, davor, vorher, and before, as well as nach, danach, nachher, and nachdem. Grüß Gott, hallo, ich bin Billy Badger und das ist Bausteine 3. Okay, so let's start off with some handy prepositions, vor and nach. Now, it's going to be good to get to know these because we're going to meet them again in various forms when we start thinking about connectors and conjunctions. Now, since they're prepositions, they won't introduce whole sentences or clauses. Instead, they'll just precede nouns like in these examples. Vor dem Semesterbeginn lesen alle Studierenden das Textbuch. Here we've got 2 events, if you like, 2 things that are happening. We've got the semester starting and we've got students reading the textbook. Vor helps us understand which one comes first. The students read the textbook before the semester starts. Well, hopefully anyway. Let's take another example. Vor der Vorlesung trinken Sie einen Kaffee in der Mensa. Again, 2 events, 2 things happening. There's a lecture and some people drinking coffee in the university cafeteria. Which one comes first? Well, we have the phrase vor der Vorlesung, which will introduce the most recent event because whatever else is going on in the sentence, it happens before it. So it's quite an easy way of establishing an order of events. But we need to be careful. We can only use this with nouns and articles. Let's look at another example and I'll show you what I mean. Vor dem Regen habe ich im Garten gearbeitet. Again, 2 things, some rain and me working in the garden. In English, our sentence would be, before the rain, I was working in the garden. And I notice I'm using for, the equivalent of before, with an article and a noun, not with a subject and a verb. I'm not saying before it started raining or before it rained. We need a conjunction to do this, and we'll come back to this a little bit later in the video. Let's look at changing the order of events we've just been talking about. And we can do this quite nicely with the preposition nach, which means after. Another preposition that we'll just be using with articles and nouns rather than whole sentences or clauses. Nach dem Semesterbeginn lesen alle Studierenden das Textbuch. This is much the same sentence as before, except that the order has changed. The students are reading the textbook after the semester has started, or more precisely, after the start of the semester. Because this first phrase doesn't contain a verb. It's not a clause, it's not a, if you like, a sentence all by itself. And then we could say, nach der Vorlesung trinken Sie einen Kaffee in der Mensa. They're drinking the coffee after the lecture. And in our final example, I'm working in the garden after the rain has finished. Nach dem Regen habe ich im Garten gearbeitet. One thing to note before we move on is that both prepositions are used with the dative because we are locating events in time. Righto. Let's turn now to our connectors. These are words that we can use to introduce whole sentences. Let me show you what I mean. We'll be using some of these. Dann, danach, nachher, and später. And they're all, well, pretty much interchangeable. Let's go back to some of the events that we've already been talking about. First of all, we had vor dem Semesterbeginn lesen alle Studierenden das Textbook. Let's split it up into 2 separate clauses. Now, the first thing that happens is that the students are reading the textbook. And then, which is what Dann means the semester starts. Die Studierenden lesen das Textbuch. Dann beginnt das Semester. You can see that we've got two separate sentences. Dann is a connector that connects the ideas in sentences and establishes an order of events. If we wanted just to use the one sentence, we could join them up with an und. Die Studierenden lesen das Textbuch und dann beginnt das Semester. We'll use the other connectors in much the same way. You remember that sentence with the lecture and the students drinking coffee? Well, instead of saying nach der Vorlesung trinken Sie einen Kaffee in der Mensa, we could say Sie besuchen die Vorlesung und danach trinken Sie einen Kaffee. Here you'll recognize the little word nach that we're using in the da compound danach. It refers back to the thing that we've already mentioned and says after that they went for a coffee. Similarly, we could use davor instead, which would tell us what they did before that, before the lecture. But let's move on to the other two connectors that we've mentioned. We have nachher, which is the equivalent perhaps of afterwards, and später, which just means later. Both get used in much the same way. The difference is mostly stylistic. Here are some examples. Ich habe im Garten gearbeitet und nachher hat es geregnet. I worked in the garden and afterwards it rained. Of course, we could have used später, which is maybe just a little bit less precise. Ich habe im Garten gearbeitet und später hat es geregnet. But let's turn now to our final group of words, the conjunctions. Here, we're really just thinking about two of them, before and nachdem. Again, you can recognize those little words that we introduced at the beginning, vor and nach. Let's see how we use them. Of the two, I'd say before is probably the easier one to use. Let's have a go at expressing the idea that the students should read the textbook before the semester starts. Die Studierenden lesen das Textbuch bevor das Semester beginnt. We've got two different kinds of clauses. The first is the main clause with the verb in the normal second position. And the second one, introduced by the conjunction before, is a subordinate clause where the verb is at the very end of the sentence. Now, it's a little bit difficult to tell in this example because we've got such a short clause. Let's rewrite one of our other sentences, maybe the other one with the rain and me working in the garden, where the difference is going to be a lot clearer. Bevor es geregnet hat, habe ich im Garten gearbeitet. In this example, I'm starting with the subordinate clause, just like I might in English. Before it rained, I was working in the garden. Now, if we're familiar with subordinating conjunctions like the ones in this video, then this will be pretty easy for us. Let's turn, though, now to nachdem, which allows us to swap the order of events. Rather than talking about an event that happened before another, we'll be focusing on what happened or happens after an event. Again, there's something new here to watch out for. See if you can see what it is. Nachdem Sie die Vorlesung besucht haben, gehen Sie Kaffee trinken. Now, can you see what's different? Let me give you another example. Nachdem ich im Garten gearbeitet hatte, regnete es. After I worked in the garden, it rained. Can you see what's happening? One more example maybe. Nachdem wir den Film angeschaut hatten, gingen wir schlafen. Or perhaps, nachdem du dieses Video angeschaut hast, wirst du alles verstehen. We worked it out? Let's see. We've got one event happening after the other, just like in all of our other examples, but with nachdem, we need to emphasize the fact that one event comes before the others, and we do this by using tenses that are one step apart. So if the more recent event is in the present tense, then the previous event needs to be in the perfect tense. And if both events are in the past, but one is maybe just a little bit earlier than the other, then the first event will be in the pluperfect and the more recent one in the simple past tense. This is the only time we need to use two different tenses. Nun, nachdem du dieses Video angeschaut hast, wirst du wohl alles verstehen. Ich verabschiede mich aber jetzt, sage auf Wiedersehen und Tschüss. Danke fürs Zuschauen und wir sehen uns in dem nächsten Video. Tschüss.